Rush's Hold Your Fire is often criticised for being smothered in all this production goo, being as it is balls deep in the 1980s. But is it really that bad? Rush's Hold Your Fire, released in 1987, is a divisive album in many respects. It's certainly one that is seen to mark the end of the band's synth period, before they returned to a harder, more guitar-led, crunchier sound. Alex Lifeson, like a lot of guitarists in the 1980s, experimented with different processes, reducing his guitar to a kind of echoey chord bursts and razor-thin leads. We get this stabbing guitar effect, which is quite effective on a wonderful and icy album like Grace Under Pressure, with its exploration of dystopian new wave espionage. Lifeson's guitar seems to take a step backwards and seems to be more about atmospheric colouring, to the extent that a lot of his playing on this album, and indeed Grace Under Pressure, wouldn't be out of place on the Police album Synchronicity, for example. In fact, I think it was one waggish critic that said Alex Lifeson's guitar sound after Moving Pictures becomes as unassuming as a vibrator under 6 feet of sand. This album suffers at all. It suffers from those production tropes of the 1980s, that big roomy sound, reverb, as Rush go all Billy Ocean on us. And let's not forget, we also get this gratuitous display of mullets and chinos during this synth-heavy unprog. Actually, I don't think unprog is particularly fair, to be honest with you. But it's certainly records that were exploring more new wave textures, more Martha and the Muffins and Van der Graaf Generator. This album has been described as chilled, rather than chilly, which is the atmosphere that's explored on the wonderful Grace Under Pressure album. I'll let it be understood that I happen to be a huge fan of their synth period. I think Signals, since I did my Rush ranking video, I think Signals has moved up a notch or two higher. Grace Under Pressure is an album that I absolutely adore. I think there's a review of that on my channel if you want to go and check that out. But on this album, it's not so much the synths and the predominance of other textures. It's the production and the sound of this record that I object to. This album tries to straddle a line between the contemporary sound of 1987 and yoga and meditation music. You can almost feel your chakras realigning as you listen. False 10 is a great number. It's probably about as ballsy as this record actually gets. I think Geddy Lee's bass popping sound gives me hives at sometimes on this, but it generally fits in with the atmosphere of the record. Rumour has it this was the last track written for the album, as it was the 10th number, hence where the title actually comes from. And then we get Time Stands Still. This is one of my favourite Rush numbers, one of my least favourite Rush albums. And yes, it does evoke all those very pop atmospheres of the decade, but nevertheless it's the melody and message behind this one that is so striking. This idea of time being transient, we are as clouds that veil the midnight moon, so to speak. We get great lines like freeze this moment a little bit longer, make each sensation a little bit stronger, experience slips away, time stands still. Open Secrets is an interesting one with its oxymoronic title, with Geddy Lee providing some vibrant bass, and even Alex Lifeson offers some impressive 80s guitar riffing, just to prove he's actually on the album. And you get that wall of noise created by the synths and keyboards. And Second Nature, which has been described by one critic as an incisive analytical jab that appears anti-capitalist. And this, of course, is accompanied by all those keyboard plinks and plonks, and which proves more than anything on this record that we need more Lifeson. I think I've mentioned that, haven't I? But it's a nice follow-up to Open Secrets. Rush have always been absolutely spot on in terms of their sequencing of their albums. Second Nature is a catchy number that discusses the responsibility we all have in the daily choices we make in life. Prime Mover is a promising number that really rocks and has this anthemic choruses. We've got some great choruses on this record, and this one has this slow burn crescendo with this metaphor explored that the journey is perhaps more important than the arriving. Again, it fits into the overarching mood of this record, or narrative arc. There isn't a narrative arc, but I think you know what I mean. And this song musically is interesting as it seems to take a jazzier direction. Lock and Key has a keyboard line that I rather like. It's quite a dark number, one of the darker numbers on the album. The idea that we all have these very negative, I think, brutal instincts within us, the need to keep them shut down. Mission is a moody, synth-heavy number with an anthemic chorus, with its title derived from the opening lyrics. But it's one that fits perfectly within the album, I think. Geddy Lee's vocals really drive this song, which touches upon the desires and obsessive-like feelings people have when they're going after their dreams. Turn the Page is one of my favourites on this, and High Water, I couldn't put my finger on it, but there's something about this reminds me of something else, and it recently occurred to me. It's has some resemblance, I think, to Bach's Plateau, which was off Caress of Steel. Then we get, I think it's Taishan or Taishan, please forgive me if I've said it wrong. But it's a slow-moving number, but it's also one of the most moving tracks on this album. It's quite a beautiful song that opens up all those woodwind instruments as they go all Peter Gabriel on us. It's a track that details thousands of years of Chinese history. Neil Peart takes us on a whirlwind tour upon the sacred mountain of Taishan. Overall, I mean, I asked the question, is it really that bad? No, it's not really that bad. We're talking about Rush after all. I mean, Rush, the musicianship and the writing is usually top-notch. As I said, my only issue with this album, I know a lot of fans have criticised it, my only issue with this album is generally the production and the way it sounds. I just find it very difficult to get past that. It works fairly well on a track like Time Stands Still that does have that 1980s pop sensibility to it, but the other tracks I think feel a little bit polluted. And let's be clear, there are some sparkling gems to be found on this record, but there is also a preponderance for what I would call predictable songcraft and a heavy reliance on keyboard atmospherics to fill in the gaps on perhaps some of the weaker tracks. Then Hold Your Fire does also offer some of the finest lyrical content by Neil Peart. For example, in the song Second Nature, I believe, folks are basically decent, conventional wisdom would say, but we all read about the exceptions in the papers every day. What a great line, but my favourite line on this album is, how can anybody be enlightened? The truth is, after all, so poorly lit. Rush are a band that have always evolved, sensitive to the musical stylings of the day, yet at the same time remaining firmly rooted in their own philosophy. You might think Hold Your Fire is the apex of that evolution, before, of course, they returned to a harder sound, a sound that they pursued in the 1970s. But I don't agree. I see this as an era for Rush that was just fizzling out, and that a change of direction was desperately needed. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this video. This is another one of my series of Is It Really That Bad? I've done a few of these now. I do urge you to click like, subscribe, and do check that notification bell if you haven't done so already. And check some of the links below this video for ways you can support the sterling work done a classic album review. Become a Patreon, why not? There's a fine body of work on there now, and we're becoming quite a tight-knit classic rock community. Other than that, just leaves me to say, hope you're well, staying safe, but more importantly, of course, is that you keep listening.